I never expected my marriage to collapse so quickly. We'd been married for 5 years, and I thought we had a good rhythm. We woke up every day, had breakfast, and talked about our plans. We discussed finances, how many kids we wanted, and whether it was time to move into a bigger house. It wasn't the most thrilling life, but I liked the stability. My wife and I met in college, and we'd always been open with each other about our goals and concerns. When she told me she had a mandatory work trip for a new project, I didn't think twice. We'd been through periods of distance before, and they never caused any problems. I trusted her, so I helped her pack, kissed her goodbye, and figured that was that. But when she came back, it was like I was living with a stranger, and I felt lost. I noticed the first change that evening. She used to greet me with a hug or at least a tired smile, but she just brushed past me with a distracted wave. She vanished into the bedroom without offering an explanation. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was exhausted or upset about something that happened on the trip. I gave her some space, hoping she'd open up when she was ready. A few days later, she casually mentioned she'd been seeing a therapist. My initial reaction was relief. It meant she was trying to address whatever was bothering her. I figured maybe she was stressed out from the project. I told her I supported it, that therapy was a great idea, but whenever I asked questions, she'd clam up. I started feeling a slow dread that something more complicated was at play, but I couldn't prove yet. Confusion remained. She was glued to her phone all the time, sending messages under the table when we ate, or disappearing into the bathroom for half an hour. I tried to respect her privacy, but I wondered who she was texting. Whenever I asked, she'd say it was work or her therapist. One night, I saw her screen light up with a name I recognized, Emily. Emily went to high school with my wife. They weren't close friends, just acquaintances. It seemed odd she was suddenly on my wife's contacts. I asked why she was talking to Emily after all these years, and she shrugged, saying Emily was giving her advice. She even claimed Emily was a therapist now, which explained everything. I considered reaching out to verify, but I didn't want to break my wife's trust. I kept quiet, trying to maintain calm, yet the pit in my stomach grew deeper. Things took a sharp turn when she said she wanted an open relationship. I was blindsided. We'd never discussed anything like that, and it felt like a slap in the face. She dropped it casually over dinner, like it was no big deal, saying it could save our marriage. I tried to ask where this idea was coming from, and she repeated that it was recommended by her therapist. I pressed further, but she refused to give details. She insisted this was the key to happiness and that I'd be unfair if I didn't at least consider it. I was shocked, angry, and desperate to understand. I asked if she was already seeing someone else, and she denied it with a dismissive shrug. My gut told me otherwise. The next day, she told me to think carefully because if I didn't agree, she might have to end things. I panicked. I was torn between my love for her and the utter shock I felt. I tried to have a serious conversation about our vows, about everything we'd built together. She refused to engage. She insisted I was being narrow-minded and clinging to outdated notions of fidelity. I started to suspect that Emily was behind this shift, so I asked a mutual friend if Emily really was a licensed therapist. He said he doubted it. Emily had apparently dropped out of college and bounced around odd jobs. There was no record of her attending any graduate program. My heart sank. I confronted my wife, and she doubled down, insisting Emily was legitimate. She accused me of not trusting her word. Later, she texted me a link to some website that looked sketchy at best, supposedly confirming Emily's credentials. It only deepened my suspicions that I was being lied to. I fumed. I tried to save the marriage by suggesting couples counseling. She refused. She insisted she already had professional help and didn't need more. Her phone conversations with Emily became more frequent, and she'd lock herself in the spare room for hours. Sometimes I heard snippets of their talk. They'd giggle about men, about how I was too controlling, about how she deserved to explore her desires. It stung like hell. One night, I finally cracked and checked her phone while she showered. I know it was an invasion of privacy, but I was desperate. I found messages from Emily that read more like a friend egging someone on to cheat than any real therapist advice. Emily wrote things like, "He'll never find out if you're careful," and "You have one life. Don't waste it on a prude." My hands trembled as I scrolled, my worst fears confirmed. My stomach churned. When I confronted her with these texts, she flew into a rage. She accused me of violating her trust and told me I was the reason she needed an open relationship. According to her, I was stifling her growth and ignoring her needs. I reminded her that she hadn't even mentioned feeling neglected before this so-called therapy. She threw a glass across the kitchen and called me a hypocrite for snooping. Nothing made sense anymore. She stormed out and spent the night who knows where. I stayed up, hands shaking, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. I reread some of the messages I'd saved. Emily even wrote, "If he doesn't comply, you have every right to leave him for someone fun." It felt like my wife was being coached to destroy our marriage. I realized that nothing I said would change her mind. I felt utterly powerless then. The next few days were the worst. She hardly came home, and when she did, she avoided me. She'd go straight to the guest room, lock the door, and talk on the phone with Emily for hours. At one point, she said she was heading out to meet someone. I asked if it was a date. She smirked and said, "You wanted to keep me from living my life, so I'm taking it back." My heart pounded. I felt like I was watching my wife turn into a stranger right before my eyes. The next morning, I saw an unfamiliar car parked down the street, and I had a sinking feeling it was related to her newfound freedom. That same day, she demanded we separate our finances so she could have the freedom to do as she pleased. She was fast-tracking the destruction of our life together. I felt numb. I started collecting evidence. I took screenshots of everything on her phone I could find, including her chats with Emily. I saved records of her sudden financial moves. I researched local divorce attorneys, even though I felt sick doing it. I wanted to see if I had any legal recourse if she tried to bleed me dry. Part of me still wanted to believe she'd come around, that this was some kind of phase. But the more I saw, the clearer it became. She wasn't just seeking an open marriage. She wanted an escape from me, as if our entire relationship had been a mistake. Late at night, I heard her laughing on the phone with Emily, using words like freedom, excitement, and finally living. It was like a knife in my chest. I knew I had to prepare for the worst, even if it broke my heart. I felt shattered. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It was Emily. She basically told me to stop interfering with my wife's happiness and let her do whatever she wanted. She said I was being selfish and controlling, and that I should try being a man who can handle a strong, independent woman. It took every ounce of willpower not to respond with pure rage. Instead, I blocked the number and doubled down on my plans. I gathered more evidence, including screenshots of Emily's fake credentials. I asked a friend with some tech skills to see if that website was real. He confirmed it was a cheap template site with no legitimate licensing. I confronted my wife again, showing her the proof. She accused me of fabricating everything, called me paranoid, and threatened to move out if I kept attacking Emily. It felt like a losing battle. I was furious. I didn't forgive her. I had no interest in letting this slide. If she wanted to blow up our marriage, fine, but I refused to be a passive victim. I met with a divorce attorney who specialized in protecting clients from hostile spouses. I handed over everything: texts, financial records, notes on Emily's involvement. He gave me a clear strategy: document everything, do not leave the marital home unless forced, and safeguard my finances. I also reached out to a private investigator, hoping I could confirm if my wife was having an affair. The PI suggested phone records, tracking her vehicle, and gathering photographic evidence. It all felt surreal, but I had to protect myself. Late one night, I finally looked myself in the mirror and realized I couldn't fix this anymore. I was done trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. My resolve hardened. I felt unwavering. 2 weeks later, I had enough evidence to confirm she was seeing another man. The PI captured photos of her meeting a guy at a hotel, looking very cozy. My attorney advised me not to confront her just yet. He said it would be more advantageous to keep collecting information until we filed for divorce. Meanwhile, she grew bolder, hardly bothering to hide her late-night outings. When I asked where she was going, she gave vague answers or rolled her eyes. Emily continued to pump nonsense into her head, urging her to live a little and treat me like an obstacle to overcome. I stopped caring about her justifications. My focus shifted to preparing for legal war. I set up a separate bank account, changed my passwords, and quietly removed valuables from the house. It felt cutthroat, but she'd left me no choice. My trust was obliterated. I felt livid. The day I filed for divorce, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. I didn't tell her right away. I wanted to finalize everything before she could sabotage me. My attorney fast-tracked the papers, citing adultery and irreconcilable differences. I had photographs, text messages, and even testimonies from a couple of friends who'd witnessed her with other men. The moment finally came when she was served. She burst into the house, screaming at me for betraying her. The irony was almost too much to bear. She threatened to take everything, to ruin my reputation, to make me regret ever crossing her. I stayed calm, reminding myself that my attorney had prepared me for this exact scenario. She tossed clothes into a suitcase, yelling about how Emily said I was emotionally abusive for not letting her have her fun. I stood there, silent, refusing to engage. I felt resolute. She packed up and left that evening, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. I felt an immediate sense of emptiness, followed by a wave of relief. I spent a sleepless night sifting through memories, wondering how we had gone from planning a future to this. Early the next morning, I got a text from Emily. "You're making a huge mistake. She deserves better." I ignored it. As the days passed, I dove into preparations for the legal battle. My attorney assured me the evidence was solid. Meanwhile, I discovered she'd moved in with the guy from the hotel pictures. Emily kept sending me messages, each more scathing than the last, calling me small-minded and pathetic. I saved them all. I decided to use every shred of proof showing how Emily manipulated my wife. I wanted no mercy, just a clean, decisive victory. I was unstoppable. Months passed and the divorce proceedings dragged on. She tried to contest everything, from the division of assets to spousal support. My lawyer stayed vigilant, hitting back with proof of her affair and her reckless spending. At one point, she claimed I was abusive, but we provided messages that contradicted her lies. Emily was present at every hearing, smirking in my direction as though she'd won. Whenever I caught her eye, I felt a surge of determination. I would not lose to these two. Eventually, the judge saw through their nonsense. My wife's demands were slashed considerably. She ended up with only a fraction of what she initially wanted. The day the final decree was issued, she glared at me in disbelief. Emily was fuming. I didn't celebrate, though. I felt relief, but there was still a dull ache from the betrayal. I wasn't done yet. My revenge wasn't over. I gathered the evidence of Emily's fake therapy practice and sent it anonymously to her state's licensing board. I included screenshots, website data, and a detailed account of how she manipulated my wife under the guise of therapy. I knew she wasn't a licensed therapist, but I wanted an official body to investigate. I also found out where Emily worked, some small wellness center that touted spiritual healing. I sent them a package with all the proof, making it clear she was falsely advertising herself. Word got around quickly, and soon Emily lost her position. She tried to retaliate by harassing me online, calling me every name under the sun, but I had enough documentation to press charges for defamation if she continued. She backed off. My ex-wife heard about it and tried to confront me, but I told her it was none of her business anymore. I refused her pleas. Not long after, I learned Emily faced a hefty fine and possible charges for practicing without a license. People who'd gone to her for counseling came forward with complaints. Apparently, she'd broken confidentiality, offered reckless advice, and caused more harm than good. I felt a grim satisfaction. I never forgave her for meddling in my marriage and encouraging my wife to cheat. I watched from a distance as her world crumbled. My ex-wife tried to play the victim, saying I'd ruined Emily's life out of spite. I countered that Emily had no right to destroy ours in the first place. The truth eventually came out in our social circle. Emily was a fraud, and my wife had followed her blindly. Some mutual friends cut ties with them both. That was fine by me. I didn't want any part of their toxicity. My revenge felt justified. I had zero regrets left. As for my ex-wife, she moved in with that guy. I heard rumors they fought constantly. She tried to blame their problems on me, saying the stress of the divorce had changed her, but nobody bought it. I kept my distance and focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a smaller apartment, sold the old house, and used the proceeds to clear debts and start fresh. I got back into hobbies I'd abandoned, spent time with supportive friends, and even booked a solo trip to clear my head. Every so often, I'd get a pitiful text from her saying she missed certain things about our life together. I never replied. She made her bed. Emily was out of the picture, dealing with her legal nightmare. Meanwhile, I learned to breathe again without the weight of betrayal on my back. I felt free for the first time. I embraced independence. One day, I got a call from my lawyer. He told me my ex-wife wanted to renegotiate the divorce settlement, claiming financial hardship. She apparently couldn't pay her bills, and her new boyfriend wasn't as supportive as she'd hoped. My lawyer asked if I wanted to consider it. Without hesitation, I said no. I'd already been bled enough, and the court had ruled fairly the first time. She'd made her choices. I felt a certain grim pleasure in denying her. I didn't owe her compassion after she ripped our marriage apart. Word traveled back that she was furious, blaming Emily for giving her terrible advice and me for not bailing her out. But her outrage didn't faze me. I was done with her manipulations, done with the toxic cycle. The final piece of revenge was simply refusing to be her safety net. I felt vindicated. No mercy, no forgiveness now. Looking back, I realize I've changed. The naive husband who believed in unshakable loyalty is gone. I didn't forgive her betrayal. I didn't forgive Emily's interference. I took my revenge by dismantling their lies and exposing their fraud. Some might say I became vindictive, but I see it as self-preservation. I refuse to be victimized any longer. It's not a happy ending, but it's my ending. I'm free from someone who decided I wasn't enough, who let a fake therapist convince her to abandon everything we built. And Emily? She's facing legal consequences for her sham practice. My ex-wife has to live with the choices she made, choices that cost her any sympathy I might have offered. I'm not sorry for what I did. I own every step of my revenge. At least now I can move on without the weight of betrayal haunting me, and I feel victorious. Now,